Hi, everybody. Welcome. Sorry for the delay a little bit. I was getting my stuff all set up. My name is Elliot. I am the IELTS expert at Magoosh, and we are going to talk today about reading strategies. I'm excited to talk about all of that with you. So welcome to all of you. I see a bunch of students joining, Magoosh students here on our Zoom call. I have questions today. Let's see, I've got to get my class list up here so I can see your names. If you have questions today during these live classes or your comments, and I will ask you to provide your answers and feedback to things this hour, please use the chat feature and don't mute yourself during class. It just works better for the audio. And I also want to welcome all of you here joining on YouTube. We are streaming our classes on YouTube. You can kind of look in on what we're doing, and please feel free to put answers and questions in the chat. We'll need to focus on the Magoosh students in the Zoom call first, because their questions, I need to focus on their questions because they are Magoosh students. They're enrolled in our classes, and I want to prioritize those. But I will look over and I'll try to answer your questions in the chat also, so that we can all participate and get the answers we need here today. Okay, so don't hesitate to put them in there. I'd love to see what you're saying, and most of the time I can respond to everybody's questions. Okay, just want to I want you to all keep that in mind out there on YouTube, that I'll be looking in here on the Zoom call as I'm doing most of the lesson here. All right, but welcome everybody to this class. So for our Magoosh students, I'm going to begin recording this session now so that I can put it on your dashboard later on. So let me do that. There we go. Okay, so now this will be ready for you later on today after our class. If you want to refer back to things we're talking about here today, you can look at the recording. I'll put it on the dashboard. It usually is ready to go a couple hours after we finish class. All right, well, welcome. So here's what I'm going to do. If you all could just be prepared for today, because I'm going to ask all of you to do some participation today. We are going to first begin our lesson talking about the strategies related to skimming and scanning on the reading test. And then later on in the hour, I am going to walk us all through slowly the process of skimming and scanning with a reading passage, and then we're going to answer some questions together. And I want my goal is that we can slow down on the strategies that we talk about related to skimming and scanning. We can ask questions along the way. You need some extra ideas about how to apply the approaches. We can talk about those things, but then by the end of the lesson, my hope is that we can answer some questions related to a passage that we look at carefully, and that you'll hopefully be able to get a feel for how you can work on these strategies we talk about today, so that you can apply them and use them effectively when you're taking the reading test. Okay, so that's my big goal here today. And like I said, to all of you just joining, I hear the doorbell ringing on the Zoom call, and I see some folks here in YouTube. Please put your questions in the chat as we go along, and I'll focus on them. Farinaz, I see your question in there already. And it's a great question. Let me get to that in just a moment. Farnaz is wondering how long we should take to skim the passage. I'll get to that in just a moment as we go. Okay, so here we go. Let's get started. All right. I want to go over some basic things. Now, my Magoosh students here, if you've watched any of the reading strategy videos, there are going to be some concepts here that we're going to talk about today that appear familiar, okay? And I think that it's going to be a useful exercise for us to talk about some of the basic strategies we talk about in our lessons, slow down on them a little bit, and then apply them here so that you can see how they work in a more detailed way, okay? So talking about skimming and scanning, let's talk about skimming first, okay? One thing I want to emphasize about skimming is that our goal is not to understand the text in detail. Okay, that should seem obvious, but I think one of the problems students face is that when they're trying to employ the skill of skimming, they might feel frustrated or they might feel like they're not doing the correct thing because after skimming, they, of course, don't understand the passage in the same way they would if they had read it from beginning to end. That is obvious, okay? Hopefully, if you read a passage from beginning to end, slowly and carefully, you're going to understand it much better than if you just did some skimming, okay? So, to be clear, skimming is not a strategy to deeply understand a reading passage. Okay? The reason we need to skim is that on the IELTS reading test, you only have 60 minutes to answer 40 questions. And that is really, really fast for a lot of people. Now, I have some students who have been able to read the entire passage and then go answer the questions and have enough time to do that within 60 minutes for all 3 sections of the test. But I'll tell you, in my experience, that is very, very rare. Okay, most people, even actually, you may be surprised to know, even some native English speakers that I have put the test in front of to kind of time it. I wanted to time it sometimes to see, because I had a theory that even some native speakers would not be able to complete the test comfortably within 60 minutes. And I was mostly right. Most of the native speakers that I tested were really working hard to read the whole passage carefully and answer all the questions. Okay, it's just really not a lot of time and it's difficult. So we need to have an approach for most of us if we want to answer all of the questions in the section completely and accurately, we're going to have a different strategy. And that's where skimming and scanning come in. Okay, so we're not trying to understand the passage in detail. Then what are we trying to do? What we're trying to do is to gain the ability to answer questions more efficiently. We're trying to work on a skill that gets us to correct answers faster. And my suggestion for you today, as we look at these skimming and scanning strategies in detail and put them to use, is that if you practice these skills, it's not a trick that you can learn like that. It's not a trick that happens immediately. It is a skill that you need to develop as you prepare for IELTS. And my suggestion is if you practice this way, you can get better at this and it will save you time and help you to answer all of the questions in the section and hopefully answer them as accurately as possible. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at here today with skimming. Skimming, going back to Farinaz's question, my suggestion is for skimming that for each passage you encounter, you plan to take about 3 minutes, okay, skimming the text at a minimum before you begin answering questions. You have to kind of play around with the timing a little bit for yourself. People whose English abilities are really, really, really strong might be able to take less time on skimming. People whose English abilities are not as strong might need to take more time. Timing is still going to be an issue that's really serious for you if your English skills are not really, really strong. So we have to find different places for each person in a way. But my suggestion as a ballpark is about 3 minutes, definitely no more than 5 minutes skimming. Okay, that's 5 minutes is starting to get pretty long. And then you're losing out on time to answer questions. So that's where we're looking at for skimming. Okay, now you may be wondering, what is skimming? Okay, we're going to talk about it in just a little bit. Don't worry about that. We're going to get there in just a moment. Okay. Oh, Hamna, I see your question. But general IELTS, the first 2 sections have small passages. Okay, good. So good. Thank you for that reminder about general training. Yes, the general training passages in parts 1 and 2 of the test are smaller. So for skimming those, you should play around with some different approaches. If you're a general training student out there, the passages in the first section of the test tend to be pretty, well, I don't want to say easy. They're not as complicated as you're probably aware, as what your readings are going to be for part two. A little bit, part two is a little more complicated. Part three is much more complicated. So you should play around with the timing, but I would say definitely for part one, yeah, for each passage, no more than a minute of skimming down through the text, okay? And for the passages in part two, maybe a minute or a little bit more for each of them, okay? So yeah, you wanna have a shorter skimming time for all of those shorter passages that you have in parts 1 and 2 of the general training test. Thank you, Hamna, for that reminder. That's a good suggestion there. Okay, so anyway, we're going to talk about skimming and what it's all about in just a moment. Now I just want to quickly move then to scanning. Okay, so skimming, as we're going to hear about in just a moment, is where you come to a passage and you do a series of steps to try to understand what's in the passage and to identify pieces of information that are within a passage so that later you can go and answer questions more quickly. Okay, so we're going to look at that in a moment. Scanning then is where you have a set of questions that you're looking at. You read the questions carefully and you go back and scan the passage for the specific place where you can find the answer. So the goals of scanning are to as quickly as possible, find the place in the passage where the answer is likely to be found. And then once you think you found that place in the passage, then you read that small portion of text carefully so that you can interpret the sentence or sentences that are there, which should help you answer the question accurately. Okay, now, how does this all work? Well, skimming and scanning work together because of, well, there are two basic things going on. First of all, when you skim a passage effectively, you are able to understand generally where information is likely to be found in the text. So that way, when you're scanning for answers, you have information, you have an idea. Oh, I think I need to go to paragraph 3 to look for this answer. Now, you may not be right, it may not be there, but if the better you get at skimming and skimming well, the more accurate you're going to be about being able to go back and identify where in the passage to find information. Okay, so then secondly, another layer of this, okay, so after you've done skimming, you've done your skimming completely done, you're answering questions, then as you answer questions, you are learning more and more about the passage. So if I'm answering questions 1 to 8, I'm finding answers in the text. While I'm doing that, I'm gathering more and more information. By the time you're on the last set of questions that you're answering, you have read carefully several parts of the passage and you know even better where to find information as you go. So your knowledge about a passage builds as you go through. And there are different ways we can strategize which questions to look at first and which information to try to seek first. We're going to get to all of that in just a few minutes, okay? But that is your goal, that instead of reading like you normally would, reading a passage super carefully, you are now trying to spend less time going through identifying how the passage is structured, where certain information is likely to exist, and you're using that information to answer questions and build knowledge about the passage as you go through all of the questions in the section. Okay, that is basically what we're trying to do with this general approach. Okay, I see some more questions coming in. So Farnaz asked again, is reading the questions better at first for the reading back? Good. So Farnaz's question is basically, should I begin by reading the questions first, or should I go to the passage first and do the skimming? I want to say that I have seen students do pretty well with both. This is a situation where you should feel it out a little bit for yourself, But my general recommendation is that you begin by skimming and not by looking at the questions first. Okay, because when you look at the questions, depending on the question type, you're going to potentially waste some time on information you don't need to look at closely. Okay, so for example, if you have multiple choice questions, there is a lot of information provided in a multiple choice question that isn't relevant to what you're going to read about in the passage, right? There are all of those answer possibilities that are wrong, okay? True, false, not given questions. The information might be not given and it might not be in the text, and you won't have a sense of what to do with that if and even where to look for those answers if you don't first have a familiarity with the passage itself. So my recommendation is to begin like we're talking about here today with the skimming first, okay? But I have had students who really strongly preferred to begin with the questions and to get information. And I would say try it. I don't want to say that it's wrong to do that if it works for you. Okay, but I think logically for me, there are some good reasons to begin with skimming first. Okay, so that's how I would answer that one. All right, so let's get into some detail here. Let's get into this a little bit. Oh, hold on. Now, I'm going to present on the screen something, and I realized this after I put it together. It's a little actually hard to look at on the screen. I apologize for that. I don't know if you've ever seen some of those pieces of art that look like a kind of illusion. It plays tricks on your eyes. What I'm about to show you does that. I apologize for that. I didn't mean to do that. But in a moment, I'm going to put a paragraph up on the screen. And what I would like for you to do, so basically what I've done in this paragraph is I have removed a bunch of language from the paragraph, and I've left the first sentence and the key words, some of the key words from the paragraph itself, okay? And what I want you to try to do, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to just look over the really difficult page to look at for about 30 seconds. And I would like for you to think about, okay, what is this paragraph about? Okay, and if you want to put an answer in the chat, you can, okay? But what we're trying to do here is one of the key strategies of skimming, which is that you want to look at the first sentences in each paragraph, and then you want your eyes to skim over the rest of the information, and you're trying to do your best to underline things that you think are key words, people, potentially dates. You could underline words that appear to be definitions of terms that look important, or just phrases that seem to be critical to the message of that paragraph. Okay, I've done it for you by Xing out some of the less important information, but I wanted to identify to you how much you can learn about a paragraph just by getting some information. Okay, so I'm going to put this page up on the screen. I apologize, it's difficult to look at. Read over all of the words here, and then my question is, what is this paragraph mainly about? Okay, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do that, and then if you want to put your answer in the chat, you can go ahead and do that. Okay, go ahead. Try to read over this now and see if you can get the main idea. Good. I'm seeing some answers come in. Take a little more time. Those of you who want to respond, go ahead and put it in the chat. Okay. Good. I'm seeing some good guesses here. Okay, imports and exports. Good. We're talking about transportation of goods in some way. Yes. All right. Aslam, I see your answer there. Eating local foods is better than importing them. Good. That's a really strong guess, actually. I see other people saying it, excuse me, I gotta look here on my screen. Importing goods, yes. Market strategies, okay, we're talking about at the very beginning there, we see words like economy, okay. In our first sentence there, this practice of importing produce from around the world, produce, do you know what produce is? Produce is different from products, right? Products are general goods that you might build or create. It could be anything, it's a general term. Like an iPhone is a product, but also a desk or a television or whatever is a product. But produce is food, grocery, okay? So that might be a tricky piece here, but that's what they're testing you on with IELTS, right? The practice of importing produce from around the world on a large scale has become conventional, normal over the past century. Yeah. Wholesalers, there's transportation advancements to develop economies of scale. Creating goods in greater numbers lowers the cost per unit. We're talking about shipping a lot of food from a long distance, transportation, right? Importing. Then we continue. In recent years, there has been a backlash. Who knows what the word backlash means? And that's a good word to know. But anybody in the chat, could you put, and go ahead, if you're on YouTube also, you can put it in there. What is a backlash? Anybody? That'll be our nice vocab word. Drawback, a drawback is like a negative point about something. So but that's a good guess. It is a negative thing, but it's not recoil. Fall, no. Yep. So this is stopped. Oh, good. We're getting good guesses here. Repercussions is getting closer. No, okay. This will be our IELTS word of the day from this. Maybe we'll have a few more IELTS words of the day from this article because IELTS articles are difficult. A backlash is Farnaz, a strong reaction. Yeah, a strong reaction is getting really close. A backlash is like a kind of protest, or it can be where a phenomenon is happening, and then there is an opposite response to it. There is people feel negatively about it, right? So if sometimes, as an example, this happens a lot in politics. Leaders, politicians try to do something to make a policy that they think is good for everyone, but then it's often very common that people don't like the policy. And so there's a backlash against the policy. People want to fight against it in some way, okay? So that's a backlash. Yeah, Jose got it. Adverse reaction. That's a nice, good way to say it there. So what we're talking about in this first paragraph, we've got this word backlash. And what we're looking at now is, okay, wait a minute. There is then these keywords down below. There's a backlash against something, against this transportation of food from all over the world. And there at the very bottom of the paragraph, we have this idea that people should eat food grown locally. Okay, now this paragraph is part of a bigger article. We don't see the bigger article here, so it's difficult to know. If you had been able to see the full article, you would have done a couple of things. you would have read the title. You can see also, this is paragraph B. You would have been able to see paragraph A, so you would have had even more context about what's going on here. And when you look at those paragraphs, when you're skimming, what you're trying to do is to look at exactly the kind of information that's displayed on the screen here. We want to be able to quickly read the first sentences of each paragraph. And then we want our eyes to skim down through to find things that look important. And when you do that and you understand the words that are there, or at least have a sense of them, you can get a really good idea about what the paragraph is about. Almost everybody was able to identify economic themes in this, that this might be related to importing things, and it might be related to food and food production. That is extremely valuable information. Now, you can't just read this first sentence slowly. You do have to look through and go down and try to find out, get a sense of what's in each paragraph, so that you don't miss certain things. Like down here at the bottom, we've got this really important information about how there's potentially a kind of backlash, that people don't like something about importing foods from long distances, right? We get that sense. Now, obviously, if you read this whole paragraph completely, you're going to have a better chance of understanding all of the ideas there. But what we're suggesting here today is that you can get really valuable information by quickly going through and trying to identify some of this information in the passage before you start answering questions, okay? So let's talk about that just in a little more detail before, eventually, soon, we're going to start putting this to use. Excuse me, I'm going to give you the full article to look at, and we're going to practice doing some of the stuff we're talking about here. So for skimming, there are some sub-skills you should be trying to work on. So, as we just talked about, noticing titles and any section divisions within the text. Okay, so what we're talking about there, always read the title. Many IELTS, most, I think, IELTS reading passage have some kind of title to them. Some of them even have visuals for you to look at or other information. That should be part of your scanning, to look at those things that you can quickly identify, okay? Is the article divided in any way? Are there subheadings anywhere? Look at those, okay? All right, that's goal number one, just taking in the really high level information that you see. Okay, but then you want to, then this is what takes practice. This is not easy, okay? This is not a trick that you're gonna turn around this afternoon and be able to do immediately. This takes practice. Identifying the topic of each paragraph, like we just did on this paragraph where I had all the X's throughout, okay? What you want to do, what I advise you to do, is to try your best to read the first sentences, to skim through the paragraph quickly, but also slow enough where you're really thinking about what's there. And you try to add, if you're taking the paper-based test, a quick little note about what you see in that paragraph, okay? No more than 1 to 3 words. Don't write a sentence. That's too long. This should be fast, okay? You try to identify what's there. You write a quick little note. I'm going to show you some examples of this in just a little bit, okay? And then as you're skimming through, your eyes are going through the text and you're trying to underline key terms the best you can. Now, are all of your key terms going to actually end up being key terms that you underline? No, you can't be 100% accurate with this. Are all of the key terms you underline going to be necessarily information that is going to be tested? So in your questions? No, also not. It's not really your goal to predict what they're going to ask for questions. Your one and only goal is to get a sense of what's in the paragraphs and how the whole article is organized, how the information is organized in the text, a sense of what's in each paragraph, and then you have some notes that you can use to go back and find the information when you're answering questions. That is your big goal that you're trying to work on for skimming. I've got a question coming in here. Is the reading passage structure similar to the one we write in writing task 2? Great, that's an interesting question. Not necessarily, no. What we're talking about with the structure of these passages is that, you know, different passages are going to have different goals, different ways that they present information. So some passages might be presenting a problem, and then the author provides a solution or a recommendation to that issue. Okay, that's a little bit similar to what you might find on certain task 2 question types, yes. But since these are longer, the information is going to be potentially organized in different ways. Maybe the author is going to present a bunch of arguments showing advantages to some idea. Like they'll have several paragraphs on that and then some recommendations at the end. That would be one way to do it. Maybe they do a really big contrast between two things and they go back and forth between two ideas throughout the essay. That would be another thing. Maybe you're reading about a historical event and the passage is organized in terms of time, the time throughout history, okay? So there are many ways that a passage can be organized, and our goal during skimming is to identify basically what the structure of the passage is, because that information, I want to suggest, will help you answer questions more quickly, help you identify where to look in the text to get the information that you need. Okay, so it's not exactly like task 2, but there are some similarities. It's just that these are going to be much longer and more complicated than your task 2. Now, back to general training students, I need a reminder there. The task 2 essay type is nothing like what you're going to see in the first 2 sections of the test. You're going to get more daily life info, things from work or the workplace in part 2, things from sort of daily life signs and other postings that might be out in the community in part 1. But those are not like essays really at all. And so, so yeah, that's a big difference for all of you who are doing the general training. Okay, good. Okay, so, and we're going to practice this in just a second. Our goal here is to identify the topic of each paragraph with a 1 to 3 word note alongside each paragraph. Now, if you're taking the computer-based version, there is a note function. Magoosh students, we also have the ability to add notes to the passages when you're practicing reading. So you can, if you're taking computer-based version, you can practice this skill that I'm talking about by adding little notes throughout the passage, okay? Lastly, excuse me, then actually this point is just really similar to what I was just talking about from Vikrant's question. So the last goal here is to identify the overall structure of the passage. Now, this bullet point, this last one, the clear bullet point down at the bottom, I really want to emphasize, when you are doing your skimming, you are hopefully going to get better and better at comprehending what's in a passage from the skimming work that you do. And by the end of it, you should develop some skills to be able to, just in your mind, be able to summarize in general what the article is mainly about and how it's organized. So you should be able to say, I think the author is describing the history of an important figure in the civil rights movement in the United States, and first talks about her childhood, but then talks about her major accomplishments when she was later in life, including whatever, how she retired and whatever. All of that information. You should be able to, in general, be able to summarize and identify what the article is about and where information is likely to be found. That's your major goal by the end of the skimming process that we're talking about here today. Okay. All right, so, but what I want to emphasize is I'm not talking about writing anything down. You don't want to write out, take the time, waste the time to write out a summary of anything. I'm going to provide a summary for the article we look at later, just to give you a sense of what's there. But this is something that should just be in your mind as you're moving to the question answering phase of your reading passage, okay? Let's see, I've got a question coming in here. Are these questions, do they also need skimming, like diagram completion, flowchart completion, notes and summary completion because of these questions? Okay, good. So good. So Hamna has a good question here. So when she's asking, there are certain question types where information is likely to be found in one small part of the text. And so the question is, do I need to skim in order to skim the whole passage in order to answer these question types? Good, no, but Hamna and everybody, it is very unlikely that all of your questions that you're going to answer are that type of question where the information is found in a small portion of the text, right? So summary completion questions, for example, you know that if you have a summary completion question, IELTS tells you it's very unlikely that the answers for the summary you have to complete are going to come from a wide section of the article. It's almost always focused in a small portion of the text, a paragraph, or maybe a paragraph and then just borrowing from information in the previous paragraph or just below, right? You know it's a segment there, okay? So that's really important information to have, right? But it's very likely you're also going to get a set of questions that tests your ability to take in more information, right? Matching headings questions, okay? Or matching information questions, even multiple choice or true, false, not given. These can come from a variety of throughout the text, and it's likely IELTS will give you a mixture of both, right? So it can be a really good idea to do this skimming to help you get started with those questions that ask you to take a look at the whole text. Because remember, that's a good way to learn about the text so you know what's there and where information is likely to be found. And then you can get to those, after you have done those, it's extremely likely you're going to know exactly where to go in the text to find the answers for those more detailed questions. And you won't waste any time because you're already highly familiar with what's there. And then you can focus on those questions that are only from a small segment of the test. That would be my recommendation for those. That's a good reminder though, Hamna, because that's a place where I think when students tell me that they like to begin with answering questions first before getting into skimming deeply, that could be a good place to start. Okay, it could be, if you are quickly able to identify where those questions likely are, you could go to that section and begin answering questions more quickly. The problem with that though is that you're not going to know what's in the rest of the text, and it's likely you're going to be tested on that by other question types that you're encountering. Okay, so I hope you're getting the sense. I am open to a wide variety of different ways of approaching these things, and I think that could make sense for some folks, but I still would argue that the skimming and getting a sense of the full text is potentially a better approach to answer all of the questions related to a particular passage. Okay, good. All right, but that was a fantastic question. Really, really good question. Okay, I'm going to keep these points up here on the screen as reminders of what we're trying to do when we skim. For my students here who are in Zoom, I want you in just a moment here. I'm going to put this in the chat. One moment. I'm going to put a document in the chat here. For all of you who are on YouTube right now, that the document is in the description below the video. You should be able to see, you should have that link. I saw some people already in the doc because we pasted it there earlier for YouTube. But yeah, get into this doc. This has the full article that we're talking about. Now, you can do what you want, but I would advise you don't start reading it yet. Okay, don't start reading the article yet, please, because I want to do a couple of things with this to practice. All right. So here's what I want to try. I want to give you all, and I'm going to be quiet here for a little bit. Let's just use this as a nice exercise time here. I'm going to give you all a few minutes to go ahead and skim this entire passage. Remember, you want to read the title. You then also want to read first sentences of each paragraph, and you want to go through and try to identify information. Now, this is a shared document, and I can't have everybody editing the document here at the same time. So unfortunately, I can't, you're not going to be able to go through and underline things this time around. But I think you can get a lot from just going down through each paragraph and trying to identify some of the keywords that are there. Okay, but here's my goal then for all of you. I'm going to give you about three or 4 minutes to go through and skim through this entire passage, okay, on the doc you have open. By the way, I suppose, I just thought of this, I didn't think of this before. If you are at home, you might be able to make a copy of this doc if you have the Google Drive, and then if you're in a copy, you could potentially do some editing on this. That would be an option for anybody out there who's watching this. So if you want to go through that step, that might be possible. I didn't think about that. Just please don't make changes to, I guess you can't make changes. I didn't allow you to edit. So you won't be able to make changes to this original document here, but that could be a way that you could do that. Anyway, we're going to go through, use your skimming. What I would like for you to try to do is to, as best you can, see if you can come up with labels for each of the paragraphs that we have here. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. Let me see. I'm going to quickly shift over and share my other screen. One moment. Oh boy, there it is. Stop this share. I'm going to go over and share my view of the document we're all looking at. Okay. Can everybody see that? No, you cannot. Hold on. There we go. Can everybody see the document now? Can you, in the chat, could somebody just put that you can see the... Yes, okay, good, thank you. Okay, so here's an example of what I would like for you to try to do. You're going to skim down through, reading the first sentences, looking for keywords that are there. And then what I'd like for you to do is, to the best of your ability, to try to label each paragraph and identify what the key concept in the paragraph is. So for this first paragraph, I'm just going to put here, I'm going to give you one of mine. Okay, this is the first paragraph, is one of the most general paragraphs. Okay, if I'm skimming this passage, my note for this passage will be global food today. Okay, global food today. If I skim through, I don't know 100% if I'm just skimming, but I think that the main idea here is to describe the situation about global food today, and how food, we have there's some details in here about how, food is transported all over the world, and it's available all year long, even though it's not in season in particular places in your country, right? Right now, I can buy food here in the summer in California that's actually not in season here, and that's because it's being transported from all over the world. Well, I don't want to take notes on all of those concepts, but I do want to add a note, because I skimmed and I noticed that that's what this paragraph is about. And I put that note there to remind myself where to find this information in the passage. So I would like for you to spend I'll give you 3 or 4 minutes here, skim down through and see if you can come up with labels for each of the paragraphs. You don't need, if you want to, you could put a summary of your labels into the chat. That would be fine. You don't have to do that. I am going to go through and share labels for each of the sections that I created on my own when we're done, but I'd love for you to try it first, okay? So I'm going to be quiet now, unless you have some questions here about what to do. I'd like for everybody to go ahead and do that, and then we're going to talk about what we came up with after the 3 minutes is up, okay? So I've got my timer here. I'm going to put back up here on the screen my goals for you, the focus that we're trying to do for this skimming. Okay, I'm going to put that up there. And now this will give you some direction for what to do. All right. So here we go. I'm going to start my timer. Go ahead and start looking at it now. Do your skimming. See what you come up with for labels for each paragraph. I'm going to give you one more minute. Okay, that was 4 minutes. Okay, it goes fast. And if you are not able to do all of the paragraphs, uh, that is normal, especially if this is not something you've been working on actively. Okay, it takes some skill to build up speed and to be able to identify main ideas of paragraphs quickly and accurately. Okay, because it's also not expected, even when you get really good at this, you're always going to be 100% correct about what's there. But I would love to get some ideas from you. Would anybody, you can put in the chat. Um, you don't have to give me your labels for all of the paragraphs, especially if you didn't complete them all. That's okay. But why don't you, if you got a label for a paragraph that you feel pretty good about, why don't you put the paragraph letter, right? We've got A through, what do we have? A through G for paragraphs. Go ahead and put the letter there and give me your 1 to 3 word label that you feel pretty confident about for that paragraph. You can put it in the chat if you'd like. YouTube folks, you can do that as well if you're watching. I'd love to see your labels that you came up with. And then I'm going to share my own. Okay, good. I see Farnaz, paragraph G, eat local movement. Okay, good, good. Yes. So there we're getting an argument for promoting eating locally in G. Good. So I think that label sounds pretty good to me. Anybody else? What label do you feel good about? Go ahead and put it in the chat. I'll give you a second or two to come up. Whoa, Zoila, you gave me all of yours. Okay, I'm gonna take a look. Changing in food production, benefits of local food consumption, economical benefits. Ooh, wow. Okay, D. Everybody, take a look in your chat. I'm gonna share mine too. For the YouTube folks, you won't be able to see this, but we've got some good stuff coming in. F. The cost of importing food versus local food, okay, and G, government policies about local food. Ooh, so Zoila, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly there. Nice list there. If I could give you a suggestion, this was very clear. You won't need to do all of this language for yourself on the text. So I'm going to put this up, Zoila. I don't know if folks on YouTube will be able to see this or not, but maybe the rest of the class here can. Nice list there. So maybe, you wouldn't have to write all of these words for yourself because you're going to hopefully have some of the context in your mind. Maybe you were just putting all those words here to communicate with me what your ideas are. And that's great because it's clear we've got a couple of things going on here in these responses. Not only do we get the main idea, but we're also seeing some of the general organization of this passage coming through in these notes that Zoila put on for us, right? We've got benefits, okay? We've got this idea of things that are good about local food that the author is trying to argue. Really nice, really nice. Okay, we've got some other responses though. Okay, E, less population. B, promoting health benefits through local food. Good. Okay, oh wow, I'm seeing some really good stuff. D, paragraph D, economic benefits of local produce. Good. Okay, great stuff. YouTube folks, seeing some answers come in as well. Good. E, sustainable. Good. Okay. Nice. Lots of good stuff there. I'm seeing. Let me give you mine. I'm gonna share with you again my screen over here, so that you can see. Okay. Hopefully you can see there. And here's what I wanted to say for mine. So as you know, paragraph 1 to me. This is Global Food Today. This is just an introductory paragraph describing the circumstances of how food is shipped all over the world, and we can get food from anywhere in the planet, basically. So in my mind, we've got that introductory concept that's there. Paragraph B. So paragraph B is tough because if you just read the first sentence, okay, the practice of importing foods from around the world on large scale has become conventional over the past century. Okay, that's good information. We talked earlier about how this was the paragraph we saw way earlier in the lesson. We're getting the sense this is about the economics of importing and that there is a benefit for food growers of shipping things all over the world, and consumers like that in some way. But to me, what stood out from skimming down and looking at keywords down below was what we did, that key word for today, this backlash that's down there. There's a backlash against global food, and it's related to this the local food movement that this article is about. So if I'm going to insert a label here, I'm going to label this one backlash, local food. This is the place where we get the definition of local food as a backlash against shipping things all over the world. This one would be tough to label. You would have to notice that word down below. You'd have to recognize that this article is talking then about a backlash. Now, it's not completely wild to think you would catch this, because if you spent time looking at the title, then you got some information about what this passage is about, right? We know that this passage is about local farms, local food, and that the perspective we're going to get is that local food might be good for the world in some way, okay? So we've got all this discussion about global food being sent all over the place, and then we maybe notice this backlash sentence down here and how we're getting into the topic that was suggested by the title of the passage, which is we're thinking about local food. And not only thinking about it, I think the author would be a good guess that the author is going to promote local food in some way. Okay, and that would be really good information to have. Good. 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 Oh, so I see some questions coming out. I'm going to get to those in just a second. I'm going to go quickly now through here and provide some more labels for you. All right, so we got the sense of local food, okay, and that there's this backlash we're talking about. Now we get into the author's key arguments. So I'm going to put here my label for number 2. Is going to be, one moment. So paragraph C, it seems like the key concept here is that we're looking about an advantage. The author presents an advantage to local food, and the advantage is health, okay? There are greater health benefits of eating local food, right? Paragraph D, similarly, we're going to get another advantage. We can tell that from skimming, and not skimming very deeply on these paragraphs, by the way. We can get that really from looking pretty early on in the paragraphs. We don't have to spend a lot of time digging in to get the sense that we're going to hear about another advantage. And it's not related to health, it's related to advantages to the community in some way. This local food can benefit communities in a couple of different ways. Okay. Paragraph E, similarly, we get this sense from skimming that there's another advantage we're focusing on. And that advantage is going to be benefits to the environment. Okay, local food has environmental impacts that are beneficial, right? And paragraph F, we go in a different direction, right? Now, the author is going to consider what people who disagree with this movement would say. We're getting into what I would call detractor points, right? The author is going to consider some of the opposite arguments to what they've said so far and present those. So if we are going to look for opposing views in a question, if there's a question related to some opposing view to the ideas we've read about so far in the article, this would be a really good place to look for it, because that's the paragraph where this author is putting all of those concepts, right? And the last one, okay, the last paragraph focuses on policymakers, and policymakers are in the government. And so this last paragraph is a pretty strong argument from the author suggesting, hey, local food is a really good idea and governments should pay attention to it and promote it. So here's a nice paragraph where we get the author's perspective that these policies ought to be supported and promoted by local officials, local governments all over the place, okay? So as you're going through, your goal is to try to come up with these concepts. Now, you've hopefully, if you're working on this on your own in the way we suggest, you've not only got some labels you can put here. Maybe your labels aren't completely accurate. They certainly don't completely capture all of the nuances of the text, right? Because IELTS has lots of tricky stuff for you. They throw in on purpose some stuff to make you pay attention, right? So I'm going to point out one of those things now. We've got a nice paragraph on government policy, for example, and that's what I identified in my label. But then, if you look up in paragraph F, look how paragraph F ends. These foods tend to have higher costs than imported food and alternatives because locally produced food does not receive government subsidies, okay? There's a mention of government issues in paragraph F. And of course, that information would be tested for you, right? So if you're using if you've identified G as your government paragraph, there is a little bit of information in one of the previous paragraphs that is probably going to be tested. They throw in a mention of government there in general. But overall, these labels should help you to identify where to look, especially on those question types that require you to look at the entirety of a passage. But if you've got even a question type that's focused on a narrow part of the passage, now we've got we've done some analysis and given ourselves some reminders of where we should go in the passage to find the information to read more slowly and more carefully as we go, okay? Secondly, as I mentioned before, so in our minds now, if we've done this labeling, we've underlined the word, we've done the labels on the side, we should be able to, at least in our mind, have a sense of what the summary, the passage summary might be. We may not be completely accurate, but after putting in that time, the 3 to 5 minutes you spent skimming the passage, you should have a sense of it by now. I'm going to put a summary into our document. Now it's up on the top here for you to see. Again, do not write a summary out for yourself when you're skimming. That takes too much time. I just wanted to provide to you a suggestion for the kind of information you should be trying to think about actively as you're doing your skimming and making your way over to the questions, okay? So a summary for this one. Some people think that food should be grown and sold locally. The article explains several benefits considering opposing views and making an argument that government should create policies to support locally grown food. Okay, so this is more nicely articulated than you're going to be able to do quickly, but this is the kind of thinking you want to have. Main ideas and how the passage is organized, right? So the organization language here, so some people think that food should be grown. This author is presenting a perspective. So the summary would show that the author has an opinion on this topic, right? The article explains benefits. That's what we saw down here. We've got advantage, advantage, advantage. 3 types of advantages, right? And then the author considers opposing views. That's in this paragraph way down here in F, okay? And then makes argument that government should create policies to support locally grown food. All right, this is the kind of thinking you want to be able to do after you're skimming, okay? It takes work. It's not easy to do, all right? Now, we've got a couple of minutes here. I would love for us now to, you've got all of these notes that are here now, and you're ready to go on to start scanning for answers. It should be, if you've got a series of questions like these, okay, and here we've got some matching information where we're trying to match information from paragraphs throughout the article. It ought to be easier and faster for you now to be able to read these questions, and if you understand them well, to be able to go back to the passage and identify where to find the information, okay? Now, we don't have time to go, I think, through all of these completely, but I want to put, oops, I'm not sharing my, question screen. I thought I was sharing my PowerPoint slides, but I'm not. Hold on, let me go back and share my PowerPoint slides with you. Here we go. There, now you should be able to see the questions on the screen. So, so now, why don't we go through and take a look at some of these questions, okay? Like I said, I don't think we'll be able to go through all of them, but you ought to be able to go through now and to use the labeling and skimming information that we have and go find some paragraphs. So you could at least make a guess about which paragraph is likely, this information is likely to be found, okay? So we've got a couple minutes here though. I would like to give everybody some time to take a look at that. I'll give you 2 minutes to look, and you can do the best you can. Could you, just based on the information that we did from our skimming exercise, make a quick guess about which paragraph this information is likely to be found in? It doesn't matter if you're wrong, it doesn't matter. Just make a guess here. Okay, so take 2 minutes, use the labels that we have, the discussion we've gone through so far, and see if you can guess where to find the answers to these questions, okay? I'll stop you after 2 minutes, even if you haven't made it all the way through, okay? All right, go ahead, give it a try. About 30 more seconds. Okay, how did that go? Were you able to pretty confidently, based on our labels and your skimming that we did a moment ago, were you able to pretty confidently go back to a place in the passage where you think the answers are likely to find for any to be found for any of these questions, right? I mean, let's think about number 9. A description of the poor appearance of foods that have been transported long distances. Okay. All right. Well, we know that paragraphs 1 and 2, A and B, talk about sending food all over the world, right? We know that we remember that there is some discussion about that topic in there. But we also know that paragraph C begins to describe the health issues related to food, and that food that is distributed long distances might be less healthy than locally grown food. So identifying that piece of information, identifying that, oh, wait a minute, we've got paragraph 3 talking about the health consequences of eating locally, we might guess that C would be a good place to start looking. Okay, so that would be a good guess there. How about number 10 in the chat? The claim that government regulation could resolve some shortcomings of local food production. Where would you turn? Which paragraph would you turn to look for that information? Put it in the chat if you've got a sense of it. Okay, I see a guess for F. Good, F or G. Excellent. We've at least narrowed it down to F and G because we know in F has a little discussion of government and G has a big discussion of government. Okay, and so we were able to skip the first parts of the passage and get directly to the place where we might be able to read closely and find that information. And by the way, that also helps us for number 11. Description of how the government helps large-scale food producers in a way that it does not help smaller ones. We might, if we really made it, if we really captured a lot from our skimming, we might be able to get a sense that F is the place to look for that, because in F, they're talking about those counter arguments to locally grown food. And at the end of it, we get a discussion of a point about government there. That would be a tough one. I think 11, out of all of these questions, 11 is the most difficult, I think, potentially to skim for and find the answer. But if you know that it's going to be an F or in G, or you have a really strong sense of it, that's going to save you time with this one. Okay. Number 12, examples of 2 specific foods that are delivered to places that are cold. Okay. Maybe a little fuzzy on this one. But we remember that in the beginning, they're talking about the general situation about food today, global food today. And we know that this passage is all about local food and the benefits of local food. It would make sense that there would be some discussion about how food that is delivered to cold places would be sort of out of place, and that we might look towards the beginning of the article, maybe an A or B, to be able to find that information. And that will save you time because, in fact, it is up there. Okay, this one is in paragraph A, number 12. Okay, 13, examples of non-farming businesses that can benefit from the local food economy. All right, well, we identified, we labeled that paragraph D was all about benefits to the community. And so that would be a good place to look for this answer. And number 14, an example of food one might replace with a seasonal option when eating locally. Okay, for this one, we go back to paragraph C, because that's all about health, the health benefits of food. Okay. So I'll put up here for you. These are the correct answers to all of these questions, and you can take a look. I will add the images of these questions and the answers to the document that you all have after. I didn't want to put them out first so that nobody would cheat or anything, but I'll add these images to the document so that everybody can see them and work on this exercise on your own if you want to. But I hope you are able to see that our labels, our skimming, it gives us critical information. If you didn't have that information and you tried to answer questions 9 to 14 without that information, you would be lost, right? You would be lost. And this would be true for other types of questions as well. I know that we had a question earlier about matching headings questions. Yes. Matching headings questions are where you have to kind of provide a nice little label for each paragraph. And that is directly related to this skill. And it would be impossible to do that without having a sense of what's in the article. And your options are either to do this kind of skimming and work on that skill and get through as quickly as you can through the passage and identifying all of these things. Or option B is basically to do slower reading and read through the entire thing, the entire passage to get that information. Like I said earlier in the lesson, some students do both, but my strong recommendation is that you practice these skimming and scanning skills that we've been talking about today so that, because in my experience, it leads to faster results, faster question answering, and also accurate question answering. Okay, you're not sacrificing accuracy at some point when you are able to do this kind of thing really, really quickly and really, really well. Okay, so that's what we have here today for skimming and scanning. I wanted to walk you all through a slower pace of doing all of this together. My recommendation for all of you out there is that you take time to do two things with your reading practice. Sometimes you need to be practicing at the full rate of speed, the full speed answering. So you should be trying to get through a passage, doing your skimming and scanning, and answering all of the questions within 20 minutes. Okay, that would be your goal. Now, for general training students, you want to take it section by section. Part one of the reading test should take you 20 minutes. Part two, 20 minutes. If you're taking general training, those sections might even be a little faster because the reading passages are just a little bit easier than academic reading passages, okay? But as a general goal, about 20 minutes, you should try not to go over that. And you need to be timing yourself. And especially if your test is coming up in the next week or 2 or 3, you should be doing a lot of reading exercises with accurate timing. Don't cheat on that. But if you have more time, you should be doing some reading practice, slowing down a little bit. And you can give yourself more time to skim and get information and do this labeling. Maybe you can give yourself 8 minutes, 10 minutes. That's not realistic for the actual test, but you're slowing it down a little bit and practicing the skills. And then over time, you should be trying to do it faster and faster and faster and faster, so that by the time you're taking the test and doing in real speed, you can do this in 3 to 5 minutes, okay? So that's my recommendation for your practice. If reading is a real struggle for you, you should be doing regular practice several times a week, trying to do both kinds of exercises, especially if you have a long time before you test. Good. All right. Good. I see some questions coming in. We are at time. Zoila, I see your question there. There's a tricky answer for question 9 because the example of specific food can be delivered to places that are cold. What can we do in cases that it seems ambiguous? If it seems ambiguous, you're gonna have to make some choices. Answers should not ultimately be ambiguous. There should be a clear, direct answer. And if you found a place where you think, oh man, I can't tell between these two, spend a minute on it. Try to understand the paraphrase that's there. And if you don't understand, if you can't distinguish between the two, it becomes a circumstance where you should feel pretty good. You've identified a place where you think, oh man, it's either this or that. It's this one or that one, and I think I know, but I'm not sure. It becomes a point where you should make your best effort to make a guess, because often what's happening there is that there might be some target language that they are testing that might be difficult, might be ambiguous to you. And the more time you spend on it, it's not really going to help you that much. The timing is so important for this. And you always want to have discipline that you're not spending a long time really weighing both sides and trying to sort it out. You've done a good job. You've identified where you think the answer is between one or two choices. And then you make your best effort to fill in the answer and move on. You don't want to lose other points because you are sitting on something that looks really, really difficult to answer. Okay, so good. All right, we are at time here. I see a couple of other questions coming in, but I need to wrap this one up for today. Like I said, I'm going to put these questions and answers in the document so you can see them later. And all of you out there, so we are going to, of course, in a couple of hours, we're going to post this video on your dashboard for Magoosh so that you can see the full lesson back and refer to some things that are there. All right. I do need to get going here. So thank you all for coming today. For Magoo students, we've got Conversation Club tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So make sure to show up and register for that if you're interested. And we have another class coming up on Thursday that we will dig into some more topics here for you today. So make sure to register for that one. And all of you out there on YouTube, we'll be on again streaming on Thursday at the same time. So make sure to show up for that. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Gotta go. See you next time. Okay. Bye-bye.
Hi, sir. I have a question.
Oh, Isaac, I really do need to run. Kim, if you have a question from today's lesson, could you
No. So I mean, after I answering the question, should I fill the filter? Yeah. So when I finish your question, I and I touch and practice to see the results. I also see the filter. So I mean, there are some date result section. Yeah.
Mhm. I'm actually not entirely sure what you're referring to there, Isaac. So here, one moment. I gotta.
Yeah, sir. So